Why did they laugh when her name was called? Why did they glance at her uniform as though it didn't quite belong? Sarah Martinez felt the weight of silence heavier than any rucksack. She stood inside the briefing room, surrounded by men who carried themselves with the ease of veterans. She was 22, 5'4", dark eyes too big for her face, and already marked as different. No one said it aloud, not here, but she knew the unspoken word they all thought: small. Small compared to the broad-shouldered soldiers leaning back in their chairs. Small compared to the grizzled sergeants with arms like tree trunks. Small enough to be mistaken for someone who had wandered into the wrong place. But Sarah wasn't small on the inside. She had grown up where nothing was given, where respect had to be fought for on cracked streets and in crowded classrooms. East Lowe's Angels had been her first battlefield. A Mexican father who worked double shifts, an Irish-American mother who counted change twice before buying groceries, a home where the sound of helicopters overhead was as common as the sirens at night. She had learned young, if you wanted to survive, you paid attention, to voices, to movements, to the subtle tension before a fight broke out. She noticed what others ignored. That instinct had kept her safe when fists flew or tempers snapped. But none of that mattered here. Not in the Army. Not at Fort Braxton, one of the most prestigious installations in the country. This was the place of elite units, seasoned operators and decorated commanders, and she had hoped that her spotless record, her top performance in basic, would earn her a place among those who mattered. Instead, she was told to report to Colonel Richards. The colonel didn't bother to look at her when she entered his office. Papers shuffled, a pen scratched. His voice was flat, dismissive. Martinez, perimeter duty, gate security. You'll start tomorrow, 600 hours. Don't let anyone important slip through while you're daydreaming. Her chest tightened. Gate duty. The words hit like a cold slap. Everyone knew what it meant. The lowest assignment, the joke post, the kiddie table of the Army. Sarah held her salute firm. Yes, sir. She walked out with her head high, but inside anger burned. That night the dining hall was loud with chatter and the scrape of metal trays. Sarah sat alone, pushing food around her plate when a laugh from the next table caught her ear. Did you see the new girl they stuck on gate duty? One sergeant said between chuckles. Martinez barely looks old enough to drive, another replied, taking a long sip of coffee. Richards put her there as a joke. Smart money says she won't last 2 weeks. Sarah froze. Heat rose in her cheeks. She wanted to stand up to demand respect, but she didn't move, because she knew what they would say: too emotional, too young, too fragile. So she swallowed the anger, let it settle like stone in her stomach, and quietly promised herself, I'll prove them wrong. The next morning was gray and sharp with wind. Sarah arrived at gate 3:15 minutes early. Her supervisor, Staff Sergeant Johnson, looked her over. He was heavyset, older, eyes kind in a way she hadn't expected. You're Martinez, he said, studying her. Heard you've got a good head on your shoulders. That's what we need here, someone who doesn't get complacent. For the first time since arriving, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. I'm ready to learn, Sergeant. Johnson smiled. Good, people think this job is boring. It is. Every ID, every car, every face, they all matter. We're the first line of defense. Miss something here and the whole base pays the price. Sarah absorbed every word. She learned the protocol: verify IDs, log every visitor, check paperwork twice. She learned how to read body language, to spot forged documents, to trust the unease that tugged at the back of her mind when something didn't fit. Within weeks, she could identify regular personnel by sight. She corrected administrative errors in visitor logs. She caught small inconsistencies that others missed. She enforced regulations with a firm, steady tone. Some soldiers rolled their eyes, some called her overeager, but word spread. Martinez took gate duty seriously. One afternoon, as she checked a line of contractors, Private Torres leaned against the guardhouse wall, smirking. He had 6 months on gate duty already and a reputation for doing the bare minimum. "You know, Martinez," he said lazily, "you don't have to act like you're guarding Fort Knox. It's just gate duty." Sarah kept her eyes on the ID in her hand. "I expect me to do my job properly. That should be enough." Torres snorted. "Come on, you're making the rest of us look bad. Relax." She glanced up, steady and sharp. "If doing my job makes you look bad, maybe you should do yours better instead of asking me to do mine worse." The words carried. Soldiers nearby heard. Some admired her for it. Others whispered that she was arrogant. Colonel Richards heard by the next morning. He called her in, expression cool, eyes calculating. "I've had complaints," he said. "You're slowing down the entry process, too thorough." Sarah held her composure. "Sir, I'm following standard procedure as outlined." "Tell me, Martinez, do you enjoy gate duty?" The question caught her. She hesitated. "Every job has importance if it's done properly, sir." Richards leaned back. "Since you seem to love it so much, double shifts on weekends, 14 hours, starting this Saturday." It was punishment, meant to grind her down, to break her spirit, but Sarah stood tall. "Yes, sir, I'll be ready." That weekend the sun blazed hot. Hours stretched long. Sarah stood through it all, checking, logging, repeating. By Sunday night, exhaustion weighed on her bones, but her eyes stayed sharp. That was when the black sedan appeared. Government plates. A man inside, well-dressed, impatient. He handed over his ID. Sarah studied it. The photo looked right, the credentials official, but something was off. The texture, the holographic seal, a detail so small most would overlook it, but her gut clenched. "Sir," she said carefully, "I need to verify your credentials." The man's jaw tightened. "I'm expected in 10 minutes. Process me through." Staff Sergeant Johnson arrived. He glanced at the ID, then at the impatient visitor. His voice was brisk. "Process him through, Martinez. That's an order." Sarah's pulse raced. The weight of her upbringing pressed down, the voice that had kept her alive in alleys and back streets. Something was wrong. She looked the man in the eye and broke the rule she had lived by. "Sir, I can't do that, not without verification." His expression hardened. He stepped out of the car, anger boiling. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Sarah lifted the secure phone, fingers steady despite the storm inside. She called it in, reported every detail, waited. The answer came back fast and cold, unauthorized. "The real official is in Washington. ID stolen. Detain immediately." Her blood iced over. "Sir," she said, voice calm but steel beneath. "Step away from the vehicle, hands where I can see them." For a moment she thought he'd run, or worse. But then Johnson moved beside her, suddenly seeing what she had seen. The man complied. Minutes later, backup arrived. The infiltrator was secured. And Sarah, barely 5 feet tall, stood with a full incident log already written, every detail recorded. Word swept the base like wildfire. The soldier who had been given gate duty as a joke had just stopped a major breach. Some called her lucky. Others whispered the story into legend. The next morning she was summoned. Colonel Richards looked at her differently this time. Not through her, not past her, at her. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. You prevented a catastrophe. You did your duty when it mattered most." Sarah stood at attention, her face composed, her heart thundering. She had been given the smallest assignment. She had treated it like the most important in the world, and in the end it had been. What she didn't yet know was that someone else had heard the story. Someone whose respect would weigh heavier than any medal. A man with scars, blue eyes, and the quiet authority of a life lived on the knife's edge. A Navy SEAL commander. And he was coming her way. Why had his eyes lingered on her ID check longer than necessary? Why did a man who had led warriors through fire and shadows pause at a gate, as if searching for something? Sarah Martinez didn't know yet, But the day the unmarked SUV rolled up to her post, she felt a shift in the air. The vehicle was heavy, reinforced, tinted. Not a transport truck, not a contractor van. Something different. Something used by units that didn't need to announce themselves. She stepped forward, posture crisp. The driver rolled the window down and handed her credentials. She glanced at the name, and her pulse stumbled. Commander Jake Harrison, U.S. Navy SEAL. The name carried weight in whispers. The kind of man who had walked into places most never returned from. His face bore faint scars, his eyes a sharp blue that didn't soften, even when he smiled, if he ever did smile. Sarah forced her voice steady. "Good morning, Commander. Purpose of visit." He studied her not in the way others did, measuring her size, her youth, her difference, but in a quieter, heavier way. A soldier's way. Meeting with Colonel Richards, joint training discussions, 900 hours. She checked the log, it matched. Everything appeared in order almost. Her gaze dropped back to the vehicle. Virginia plates, but Harrison was based in Coronado, California, a detail that would slip past anyone else, not her. "Sir," she said carefully, "your vehicle registration doesn't match your home base. Can you confirm?" For the briefest moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then it was gone. His answer was calm, even. "Picked it up from Norfolk Motor Pool yesterday. They provided it for this trip." It made sense, but Sarah had learned not to stop at "makes sense." "Do you mind if I verify that, sir?" Behind her, she sensed the tension of other guards. Was she really questioning a SEAL commander? But Sarah's tone stayed respectful, steady. Harrison's lips twitched, not irritation, not quite amusement, something else. "Go ahead, specialist. Good security doesn't offend me." She made the call. Norfolk confirmed. She cross-checked his appointment again with Richard's office, perfectly aligned. When she handed back his credentials, she caught the faintest glimmer in his eyes. Approval. "You run a tight checkpoint, Martinez." "Thank you, sir. Safe meeting." He drove off, but the air at Gate 3 didn't settle. Something about the encounter lingered. Hours later, when her shift had blurred into routine, Colonel Richards appeared at her post. And he wasn't alone. Commander Harrison walked beside him. Sarah's chest tightened. Had she overstepped? Had she embarrassed the colonel by questioning the commander's paperwork? "Martinez," Richards said, "Commander Harrison has requested a word with you. I'll take the gate." "Requested." Sarah followed the SEAL a few paces away. His presence felt different here, away from the vehicle. Calmer, still sharp but less guarded. "Specialist," he began, "this morning you did something most wouldn't have. You noticed, you questioned, you verified without disrespect. That's rare." Sarah held her bearing. "Just following protocol, sir." "No, you were doing more than that. You were thinking." The weight of his gaze didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt like assessment. The kind of look someone gave before deciding if a soldier could be trusted in the dark. "I've been talking with Colonel Richards," Harrison continued. "Your record, the security incident, your diligence, impressive, consistent." Sarah's heart hammered. She kept her voice controlled. "Gate duty is important, sir. Every person who enters is someone's responsibility." His head tilted, and this time the flicker of expression was unmistakable respect. "That attitude," he said, "is exactly what we need. Martinez, tell me something. Are you interested in opportunities beyond this assignment?" The question dropped like stone in water, rippling through everything she thought she knew. "I want to serve effectively, sir. To grow, to keep learning." "Good answer." His tone softened slightly, though the steel never left it. "I can't promise anything, but there may be possibilities worth discussing." When he left, Sarah stood frozen a moment longer, the echo of his words still in her ears. Opportunities beyond this assignment. That night, lying in her barracks bunk, she stared at the ceiling. The air smelled of boot polish and metal bunks. Soldiers snored around her, but she couldn't sleep. A SEAL commander had seen her, not her size, not her youth, but her choices. Still, hope was dangerous. She couldn't afford to believe too quickly. Not yet. Over the next weeks, Harrison's presence was felt even when he wasn't there. Richards called on her more often. Major Peterson from base security sought her input on procedural vulnerabilities. Soldiers who had once snickered now nodded as they passed. Sarah stayed steady, arriving early, checking twice, logging every detail. She told herself it was just more duty, but quietly she felt it, the invisible eyes watching, evaluating. Then December came. The cold morning carried with it the usual flow of vehicles, contractors, trucks, uniformed personnel. But when a convoy approached, Sarah felt a prickle on the back of her neck. Papers were in order, uniforms crisp, but details whispered otherwise. The first driver wore hiking boots, not issued footwear. He said his real boots were being repaired. Reasonable, but Sarah logged it. The second vehicle carried equipment inconsistent with the declared exercise. The soldier said plans had changed last minute. Plausible, but Sarah logged it. By the third vehicle, her instincts screamed. Alone, the explanations worked. Together, they didn't. She lifted the phone, called exercise coordination. The voice on the other end confirmed her fear. The real training exercise was elsewhere, with different personnel entirely. The convoy wasn't authorized. Her voice sharpened as she ordered the vehicles to hold position. Backup surged toward Gate 3. In minutes, the exercise collapsed under scrutiny. But instead of fury, instead of chaos, what followed was chillingly quiet. The fake convoy had been a test, a deliberate deception designed by the base's own tactical minds. Sarah hadn't known. No one told her, because not knowing was the point. When the last of the decoy soldiers was escorted away, Harrison appeared, Richards at his side, Major Peterson behind them. Sarah braced for reprimand, but the commander's first words cut through the cold like steel. "Martinez, how did you know?" Her mouth was dry, but she answered, "Sir, it wasn't one thing. It was the pattern, the boots, the equipment, the stories. Alone they fit. Together they didn't." Silence, then Harrison nodded slowly, approvingly. "You saw the forest, not just the trees." She would only learn later that this had been her final evaluation. The convoy had been designed to break her instincts, to trick her judgment, and she had passed. That evening, as she wrote her report, her hands trembled, not with fear, with the knowledge that everything had shifted again. She had started as a joke. She had stopped an infiltrator. She had questioned a SEAL. She had exposed a test. And now she felt it in her bones. The next step was coming. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she didn't feel like the smallest soldier in the room. She felt ready. Because sometimes, the smallest guard at the quietest gate is the only one who sees what others don't. And Commander Harrison had seen her. Why did silence feel louder than applause? Why did standing in front of hundreds of soldiers make her feel smaller than she had ever felt at Gate 3? The parade ground stretched wide under a cold January sky, uniforms pressed, boots shining. The sound of orders carried sharp through the air. Soldiers stood in formation, waiting, watching. Sarah Martinez stood among them, breath misting in the chill, heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't slept the night before. She told herself it was nerves, but the truth was heavier. She knew today wasn't routine. Something was coming. She could feel it like a storm rolling over the horizon. The ceremony began as they always did, with promotions, commendations, routine recognition. Names were called. Soldiers stepped forward. Medals pinned, hands shaken, applause offered. Faces beamed. But Sarah's gaze stayed straight ahead, her jaw locked. She remembered the mess hall whispers when she first arrived. The laughter. The bet that she wouldn't last 2 weeks. She remembered double shifts in blistering heat. The sting of dismissal in Colonel Richards' tone. And now here she was, standing among them, not as a joke, but as someone who had turned gate duty into a crucible. Colonel Richard stepped forward, voice carrying clear. Today, we recognize soldiers who embody the highest standards of service. The words rolled over Sarah, but she hardly absorbed them until she heard her own name. Specialist Sarah Martinez. The formation stirred, heads turned. She stepped out, boots striking against the pavement, eyes locked on the stage. She stood tall, though her heart hammered hard enough to make her ribs ache. Richard spoke. His voice was measured, but Sarah caught something new in it: respect. Specialist Martinez was assigned to gate duty upon arrival at Fort Braxton, an assignment considered routine, unimportant, but through diligence and attention to detail, she transformed that post into one of the most critical lines of defense. Murmurs spread. Sarah kept her expression neutral. She prevented multiple breaches. She identified vulnerabilities others overlooked, and she did so while treating what many call a minor duty as if it were the most important in the army, because in truth, it is. Sarah's chest tightened. The colonel who had dismissed her was now defending her. But then Richard stepped aside, and the air shifted. Commander Jake Harrison walked forward. The formation rippled with whispers. A SEAL commander at a base ceremony was rare. His presence alone carried weight, but his eyes, sharp, unflinching, found Sarah immediately. "Specialist Martinez," he called, "step forward." Her boots echoed as she approached, stopping before him. She snapped into a salute. He returned it, and then he spoke, his voice steady, carrying to every ear on the ground. "For the past 6 months, Specialist Martinez has been under evaluation for a program I have the honor of overseeing. This program identifies soldiers not only for their competence, but for qualities that cannot be taught: judgment, integrity, courage." Sarah's heart stopped. Evaluation, 6 months. Her throat went dry. During her assignment, she prevented breaches, identified weaknesses, and demonstrated the ability to see patterns others missed. More importantly, she treated what others dismissed as routine with the seriousness it demanded. That is excellence. Harrison paused, looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. "Specialist Martinez, you are hereby selected for Joint Special Operations training, effective immediately." The words hit her like thunder. Whispers rose through the formation, building into stunned silence. Joint Special Operations training, a path to assignments most soldiers never dreamed of. Delta, Rangers, SEALs, the kind of shadowed units where missions were whispered but never written down. But Harrison wasn't done. "Additionally," he said, voice sharp, "effective immediately, you are promoted to sergeant, with all rights, responsibilities, and expectations of that rank." Applause broke across the formation. Soldiers who had once laughed now clapped. Faces that had once doubted now stared in awe. Sarah held her salute, fighting the wave of emotion surging through her chest. 6 months ago she had been the joke. Today she was the example. When the ceremony ended, soldiers crowded around her. Some shook her hand. Others offered quiet congratulations. Torres, the private who had once mocked her, lingered at the edge, expression unreadable. But Sarah barely noticed them, because Harrison approached. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, emphasizing the new rank. His tone carried something quieter now: pride. "Walk with me." They stepped aside, away from the noise. Harrison studied her face. His expression softened just slightly. "Understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't luck. You earned this. Every choice you made, every detail you caught, every moment you refused to cut corners, it brought you here." Sarah swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know." His eyes sharpened again. "But know this, training won't be easy. It will break many. It will try to break you. But I've seen what you're made of, and I have no doubt you'll rise." She held his gaze, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. That night, alone in her quarters, She removed her boots slowly, exhaustion settling in. She sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at her reflection in the small metal mirror. Sergeant Martinez. Her mind wandered back to her father, hands rough from work, telling her that respect was earned. To her mother, voice weary but steady, telling her that dignity wasn't given, it was lived. She thought about the girl who had once eaten in silence while others laughed. The girl who had been given a meaningless post as a joke. The girl who had held an ID in her hands and felt her instincts scream. She was not that girl anymore. The gate had been her crucible, and she had come through fire. But deep inside she knew this was not an ending, it was only the beginning. Because the road ahead was darker, harsher, more demanding than anything she had faced yet. And somewhere beyond the horizon, missions waited, shadows waited, the kind of service where failure wasn't just measured in disappointment, but in lives lost. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, heart steady now. The fear was still there, yes, but beneath it was something stronger. Readiness, and a quiet truth she carried in her chest. Sometimes, the smallest soldier at the smallest gate becomes the one others stand for. And tomorrow, her real test would begin. How do you prepare for something you've never imagined? How do you walk into a room full of legends and not feel like an imposter? The bus rumbled down a narrow road lined with pines, carrying soldiers from different bases toward a training facility most had only heard rumors about. The air was thick with silence. Men with hardened faces, women with steely eyes, each one chosen, each one exceptional. Sarah sat near the back, her new sergeant's stripe still stiff on her sleeve. She kept her gaze forward, hands folded in her lap, jaw tight. She didn't speak. Neither did most of the others. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Everyone was measuring everyone else. When the bus finally stopped, the facility revealed itself. Remote, stark. A compound hidden from casual maps, ringed with fences, guarded by watchful eyes. A man in fatigues boarded the bus. His presence filled the aisle like a storm cloud. He was older, broad, a veteran of places few dared whisper. His voice cut sharp. Listen up. This is not boot camp. This is not basic. This is evaluation. Some of you won't last a week. Some of you won't last a day, and that's fine. Better to break here than out there. You are here because someone believes you might have what it takes. Prove them right or prove them wrong. Either way, you'll find out who you are. The bus emptied in silence. They were given barracks, Spartan cold, bunks lined in rows, lockers thin and metallic. No comfort, no distractions, just space to sleep if sleep ever came. The first day began before dawn. Alarms blared, boots hit floors. Sarah pulled on her uniform, heart pounding. They assembled outside under floodlights. The instructors waited, silent, watching. Assessment begins now, one barked. Every task, every moment we're watching, not just strength, not just endurance, judgment, adaptability, integrity. You'll be pushed until there's nothing left but truth, and the truth will decide if you stay. The first test was physical, long runs with weighted packs across uneven ground, mud swallowing boots, hills that tore at lungs. Sarah felt her legs burn, her chest ache. Taller, stronger candidates surged ahead, but she forced herself steady. One step, then another, no show of weakness. By mid-morning she was drenched in sweat, muscles screaming. She stumbled once, knees nearly giving, but caught herself. She didn't quit. The instructors never yelled encouragement, only cold commands. Again. Do it right. Faster. By evening, Sarah's body shook with exhaustion. Her hands blistered from rope climbs, her arms raw from crawling through gravel. She collapsed onto her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, every part of her aching. But worse than the physical was the doubt. She had seen the others, men and women built like machines, veterans of deployments, decorated, confident. She was smaller, younger, less experienced. The voice crept in as she tried to sleep. What if they're right? What if you don't belong? But she shut her eyes, remembered Gate 3, remembered the ID in her hands, the man's false authority, the moment she trusted herself. That memory steadied her. Day 2 came with new trials. Classroom sessions where intelligence briefs were thrown at them rapid fire, details about potential threats, enemy tactics, security vulnerabilities. Candidates had to analyze, spot flaws, propose solutions. Sarah sat rigid, absorbing every word. Her pen scratched notes. Others spoke quickly, confidently, but sometimes too quickly, missing the subtlety in the data. When her turn came, she hesitated, chose her words carefully, pointed out a pattern in the reports that others had missed. The room went quiet. An instructor's eyebrow twitched upward. Not approval, not yet, but recognition. By the end of the week, candidates were already dropping, bags packed, faces hardened in defeat. Some had broken physically, unable to keep pace. Others mentally, choosing to walk away rather than face another day. Sarah stayed barely. Her body hurt in ways she hadn't known it could. Bruises mapped her arms, her legs. Sleep was shallow. Food was fuel, nothing more, but she stayed. Because quitting would mean proving them right. The instructors rotated constantly, voices hard, eyes sharp, but one face appeared often: Harrison. He didn't bark like the others. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried weight. When he did speak, his words cut deeper than shouts ever could. Martinez. His voice caught her one afternoon after an exercise. She snapped to attention, chest still heaving from the run. "Yes, sir." "You're slower than half this group, smaller than nearly all of them. Why are you still standing?" Her throat burned, but she forced the words steady. "Because I don't quit, sir." Harrison studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once and walked away. The days blurred into weeks. Obstacle courses, water confidence drills, long hours of silence broken by sudden commands, team exercises where trust mattered more than muscle. Sarah struggled, she knew it. She wasn't the strongest, not the fastest, but she paid attention. She saw what others missed. She caught the details and instructions that saved her team minutes. She remembered maps after one glance. She noticed when another candidate's hands shook too badly to reload, and she stepped in to steady him. It wasn't strength that carried her, it was persistence, awareness, quiet steadiness. Still, doubt never left. It gnawed at her during nights when the barracks fell into exhausted sleep. She'd lie awake, staring at shadows, wondering if she was one mistake away from being sent home. And sometimes she thought about home. Her father, who would never fully understand this path. Her mother, who had cried when Sarah enlisted, but hugged her tighter than ever before. What would they say if she failed? The thought broke her some nights, but by morning she built herself back. Then came the night test. The candidates were dropped in small teams into a forested range with only maps and compasses. They were told to navigate through checkpoints, complete objectives, avoid enemy patrols. Sarah's team of 4 stumbled early. Tension rose. One wanted to push ahead recklessly. Another froze, uncertain. Sarah forced her voice calm. "Stop. Look at the ridge line. The coordinates don't match. If we go that way, we'll miss the checkpoint." They hesitated, but her certainty steadied them. They adjusted course. Hours later, when they reached the objective, they realized she had been right. Exhausted, mud-streaked, but successful. By the time they returned to the compound, dawn was breaking. Sarah's body ached beyond words. She collapsed onto her bunk without caring about the dirt on her uniform. Before sleep took her, she caught Harrison's eyes across the compound yard. He wasn't smiling, but he gave the smallest nod. And for Sarah, that was enough. She was still standing. She was still in the fight. And though she hadn't yet realized it, her resilience was slowly reshaping not just her future, but the way others around her measured strength. Because strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was the soldier who didn't quit when quitting would be easy. And Sarah Martinez refused to quit. What happens when your body breaks but your mind refuses? What happens when the will to stand is the only thing left? The 5th week of training came with rain. Endless, cold, bone-deep rain. It fell in sheets, soaking uniforms, turning the training fields into rivers of mud. No one was spared. At dawn, the instructors lined them up outside. Water poured from helmets, ran down collars. The voice of an instructor thundered above the storm. Today is about misery. You'll learn what it feels like to fail, to freeze, to break. Because out there, failure doesn't care about weather. Neither do we. They were ordered into the surf. The ocean clawed at them, waves crashing as they locked arms, lying on their backs in the freezing water. The cold cut into Sarah's bones, made her teeth chatter so violently she thought they might shatter. "Quitting's easy," the instructor barked. "All you gotta do is raise your hand. Hot coffee and dry blankets waiting. Just raise your hand." Sarah gritted her jaw. Waves crashed over her face, filling her nose with salt water. She coughed, sputtered, but refused to lift her hand. Beside her, a candidate broke. His arm shot up. Instructors hauled him out, wrapped him in a blanket. He didn't look ashamed, just relieved. Another followed, then another. Sarah closed her eyes, whispered to herself, "Not you, not now." Hours blurred. The instructors marched them back to shore, soaked, trembling. No time to warm. Straight into push-ups, into squats, into carrying logs heavier than most of their bodies could handle. Her arms shook violently beneath the weight. The log dug into her shoulders, her knees buckled. She thought of her drill sergeant's words back in basic. "You sure you're in the right place, little girl?" Her lungs screamed. Her body begged her to quit. But then she thought of her father, how he worked himself bloody to put food on the table, how he never complained, even when his hands cracked open from hours of labor. She thought of her mother, wiping tears away before Sarah could see them, always carrying more than she admitted. They hadn't quit, she wouldn't either. By nightfall, Sarah collapsed into her bunk, body beyond exhaustion. Her hands trembled as she tried to untie her boots. She felt tears sting her eyes, hot against her cold skin. She pressed her face into her pillow, muffling the sound. No one could see her break, not here, not now. The next morning brought another test, this one mental. A classroom lined with maps, coded reports, intercepted messages. The instructors threw problems at them fast, incomplete intel, conflicting details, no clear answers. Most struggled, some froze. Sarah leaned forward, pen scratching notes. The fatigue tried to drag her down, but her mind sharpened under pressure. She saw a pattern in the messages, a repeated code hidden in casual phrasing. She raised her hand, pointed it out. The room went quiet. One instructor gave a slow nod. It wasn't praise, but it was acknowledgement. Later outside, Harrison approached her. His presence always carried a weight that silenced everything around him. "You almost quit yesterday," he said simply. Sarah stiffened. "No, sir." "You thought about it," he pressed. His eyes cut into her like blades. "I could see it in your face. You thought about raising your hand." Her jaw clenched, "But I didn't." Harrison studied her, silent for a long moment. Then his tone shifted, softer but no less sharp. "Everyone thinks about quitting. Everyone. The difference is who lets the thought win. You didn't. That matters." He left her standing in the rain, his words sinking deeper than the cold ever could. Days turned into nights, nights into days, training blurred. There were obstacle courses under barbed wire, endless runs with weighted packs, fights in the sand pits where soldiers had to prove grit more than skill. Sarah was thrown down more times than she could count, sand in her teeth, bruises covering her ribs, but she always stood back up. One night during a late navigation exercise, Sarah's team faltered. Lost in the woods, tempers flared, voices rose. "We're wasting time. One candidate snapped. "We're lost because you don't know how to read a map," another shot back. Sarah gripped the compass, breathing steady. Her heart pounded, fear rising that they'd fail, that she'd be blamed. Then she heard her own voice cut through the chaos. Calm, firm. "Stop, look at the stars, look at the terrain. The ridge curves north, we're here." They hesitated, then followed, and when they stumbled onto the correct checkpoint an hour later, no one argued. Leadership wasn't assigned that night, it was earned, quietly. Still, Sarah's doubts clung to her. At night, when exhaustion pressed her into her bunk, she thought about home again, about the girl she'd been, the one everyone underestimated, the one who once sat in silence at a mess table while men laughed at her. Sometimes she wanted nothing more than to go back there, to something simple, but then she remembered there was no going back. She wasn't that girl anymore. One evening, after a brutal day of drills, Sarah sat alone near the edge of the compound, stretching her aching legs. Harrison appeared out of the shadows, quiet as always. "Why are you here, Martinez?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Sir." "Why are you here?" Not the answer you give in a classroom, the real one. Her throat tightened. She stared at the dirt, at her blistered hands. "Because I want to prove I belong," she whispered. Harrison's gaze didn't waver, to them or to yourself. The question cut deeper than she expected. She thought about the sergeants at Fort Braxton who mocked her, about Richards, who had assigned her to gate duty as a joke, about the SEAL commander now standing in front of her. But most of all, she thought about herself, the girl who still doubted, the girl who still heard whispers in the dark, too small, too weak, not enough. "To myself," she admitted, voice barely audible. Harrison gave a small nod. For the first time, his expression softened into something that might have been respect. "That's the only answer that matters." He turned and left, his footsteps fading into the night. Sarah sat there a long time, the cold biting at her skin, the words echoing in her chest. "To myself." When she finally returned to her bunk, she lay down, eyes heavy, body broken. But inside, something steadied. Tomorrow would hurt. Tomorrow would test her again. But she wasn't here for applause, or recognition, or even survival. She was here to prove, to herself most of all, that she was enough. What happens when the rules stop guiding you? What happens when every choice is wrong and you still have to choose? By the 6th week, exhaustion had become familiar. Pain was no longer sharp. It was constant, dull, living in every joint and muscle. The candidates moved like ghosts, their bodies running on fumes. But the instructors weren't done breaking them. This time, it wasn't about running or fighting or enduring cold water. It was about decisions. The candidates were split into teams and briefed in a dark, windowless room. Maps lined the walls. Folders were handed out, filled with photographs, fake intelligence reports, fragments of intercepted messages. The instructor spoke without ceremony. "Tonight, you'll run a live simulation. You'll be dropped into a controlled environment. Your mission, intercept a courier carrying high-value intelligence. But listen carefully, success isn't just about speed. It's about judgment." The room was silent. Judgment, the word hung heavy. When they were led outside, Sarah's team was shoved into the back of a transport. Faces tight. No one spoke. The ride was long, winding, jarring. By the time they were released into the night, the forest stretched wide around them, moonlight scattered through the trees. The simulation began. They moved in silence, navigating by compass, following the path marked on their maps. Hours blurred. The forest was alive with insects, with the crunch of boots on leaves, with the knowledge that instructors watched from unseen places. When they finally spotted movement ahead, adrenaline surged. A man dressed in civilian clothes carrying a satchel, the courier. The team fanned out. They moved as trained, quiet, coordinated, efficient. But as they closed in, Sarah noticed something strange. The man wasn't moving like a courier on the run. He stumbled, looked over his shoulder too often. His hands shook as he clutched the bag. And then she saw he wasn't alone. Two figures emerged from the trees. A woman, thin, carrying nothing but a blanket, a child clinging to her side. Sarah's chest tightened. Civilians. The courier shouted something in a language Sarah didn't know. The woman froze. The child cried. Her team leader whispered urgently, "Take the shot. Drop him before he bolts." Sarah's rifle was raised. The crosshairs found the courier's chest. Her finger hovered on the trigger. But the woman, the child, they were too close. If he fell, if chaos broke, they could be caught in the line of fire. "Sergeant, take the shot," the leader hissed. Sarah's pulse thundered. This wasn't supposed to be part of the simulation. Civilians weren't supposed to be here. The courier shouted again, pulling the woman closer, using her as a shield now. The child's cries cut sharp through the night. Her team pressed her. "We're losing time, he's getting away." Sarah swallowed hard, choices narrowed. Every option carried weight. She could shoot and risk the civilians. She could hesitate and fail the mission. She could order her team to rush in and risk everyone. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Then she lowered her weapon. "Hold fire," she whispered. Her team leader cursed under his breath, but Sarah moved quickly, signaling her team to flank wide. She motioned for them to cut the courier's escape routes. Quiet, patient. The courier grew frantic. He tried to drag the woman forward but tripped over a root. The moment cracked open. Sarah lunged from cover, weapon raised, voice steady. "Drop it on the ground now." For a heartbeat, the courier froze. Then, seeing the team closing in, he released the woman, dropped the satchel, and fell to his knees. The instructors blew a whistle. The simulation ended. Sarah's chest heaved. Her weapon lowered slowly. The woman and child faded into the forest, actors, part of the scenario, but their cries still echoed in her head. Back at the compound, the debrief cut sharp. Martinez, an instructor, barked. "You disobeyed a direct order to fire. You hesitated. Why?" Sarah stood tall, though her insides twisted. Because firing would have risked civilians. Judgment called for containment, not elimination. The instructor's eyes narrowed. "And if the courier had escaped?" Sarah's voice didn't waver. "Then I would have failed the mission with my conscience intact, sir." Silence. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Then Harrison spoke from the corner. His voice was calm, but carried the kind of weight that silenced everything else. "She's right." The instructors turned. Harrison stepped forward, eyes on Sarah. "The point wasn't to pull a trigger. It was to see whether you'd recognize the difference between what's easy and what's right. Out there, missions are never clean. Orders will conflict with conscience. Civilians will be in the crossfire. And sometimes, the best soldier is the one who refuses to see people as collateral." He turned to the room. "Martinez showed judgment. That's why she's here." Sarah's chest tightened. Relief mixed with pride. But deeper than both was something heavier, the understanding that this wasn't the last time she'd face a choice like that. Later that night, as the others collapsed into bunks, Sarah sat awake. The rain had stopped, but the forest outside still dripped and whispered. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She thought of the woman's face, the child's cries, the courier's trembling hands. All actors, all staged, but they had felt real. Too real. She realized then, training wasn't just about pushing her body. It was about reshaping her heart, testing the limits of who she was and who she might become when pushed into darkness. She didn't know if she was ready, but she knew this: she would not trade her humanity for victory. Not here, not anywhere. Because winning wasn't worth losing herself. And maybe that was the real test. How far can a human being be pushed before they finally collapse? How much pain can the mind carry before it convinces the body to quit? The answer came during Hell Week. No one spoke the name aloud without weight. Everyone knew it was coming. A week designed to strip away everything, comfort, certainty, even identity, until all that was left was raw truth. The first night began with sirens. No warning, no rest. Candidates were dragged from their bunks into cold rain and ordered to hit the ground. Push-ups, squats, log carries. Sand and mud filled their boots before dawn had even broken. Hours blurred into torment. The instructors' voices never stopped. Commands cut sharp, drills piled on drills. The ocean was no longer a backdrop. It was a weapon. Candidates were ordered into the surf, locking arms as icy waves pounded them again and again. Sarah's teeth chattered so violently she thought her jaw might crack. Her hands turned numb. Her vision blurred. Around her, bodies broke. Candidates raised trembling arms, surrendering to warmth and blankets. But she refused. One thought carried her, not you, not this time. The days became a blur of misery. No more than an hour of sleep each night, stolen in shivering piles on wet sand. Meals shoveled down in seconds. Every task heavier than the one before. By the third day, Sarah's body was a map of bruises and cuts. Her shoulders screamed from carrying logs. Her knees bled from crawling gravel. She could barely stand without swaying. That night, during a timed march with full packs, she stumbled. Her knees hit the dirt. The weight of the pack pressed her into the ground. For a moment she stayed there, forehead against the mud, breath ragged. Voices swirled, the instructors, the team pushing past her. "Get up, Martinez. She's done. She's too small, shouldn't have made it this far." Her chest tight, she wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to quit. But then she heard another voice, not out loud in her head, her father's. "Martinez, men don't quit, neither do their daughters." Her fists clenched, her legs trembled. She pushed inch by inch until she rose. The pack felt like it weighed more than her own body, but she stood. Step by step she kept moving. By dawn she was still walking, barely but walking. The fourth day brought the grinder. A pit of wet sand where candidates were ordered through endless calisthenics, push-ups, flutter kicks, burpees, while freezing water was poured over them. Sarah's body screamed for mercy. Her arms shook uncontrollably. At one point she collapsed face first into the sand, too weak to rise. An instructor knelt beside her. His voice was low, almost kind. "Raise your hand, Sergeant. End it now, no shame in it. No one will think less of you." Her hand twitched. The temptation was unbearable, the thought of warmth, of rest, of release. But she turned her head, spitting sand. "No, sir." The instructor's eyes flickered just for a second. Then he barked up again. She rose somehow. By the fifth day, half the candidates were gone. Beds sat empty. Sarah's team was fractured. Exhaustion had made them sharp with each other, snapping, fighting over mistakes. During a night navigation drill, one candidate froze in panic, unable to move through the swamp. The team shouted at him, voices edged with rage. Sarah stepped between them, her voice cut through, calm, firm. "Breathe, one step, just one." She put her hand on his shoulder, guided him, step by step, until he moved. No one thanked her, no one had the energy, but the man finished the course. On the sixth night, Sarah's body finally gave out. During a beach exercise, as she tried to lift the log with her team, her legs buckled. She went down hard. The log rolled, crushing into her shoulder. Pain tore through her like fire. She bit back a scream, tears burning hot in her eyes. The instructors descended. "She's done, get her out." Sarah tried to rise, but her arm hung useless, pain radiating. She couldn't grip, couldn't lift. One of the instructors leaned close. His whisper was sharp. "You can't even stand, end it, no shame." Sarah's vision blurred. Her pride screamed to fight, but her body betrayed her. For the first time she thought, maybe I can't. And then she saw boots, Harrison's boots. He stood just beyond the circle, watching, his eyes locked on hers. No pity, No disappointment, just quiet intensity. He didn't speak, didn't step in. But his gaze alone carried something stronger than words. "What are you going to do now, Martinez?" Her teeth clenched. With her good arm, she pressed against the sand. She forced her body upright, swaying, shoulders screaming. She couldn't lift the log, not with one arm, but she could stand. She faced the instructor. Her voice broke, but the words were clear. "I'm not quitting." The instructor stared at her, then barked, "Get her seen by medical, now." They checked her shoulder. A strain, not broken, painful but survivable. She was cleared to continue. That night, as she lay in her bunk, shoulder wrapped, body trembling, she stared at the ceiling. She had reached the edge. She had seen what it felt like to break, and still she hadn't quit. The seventh day dawned gray and bitter. The instructors assembled the remaining candidates. Less than half of those who had started were still there. Faces hollow, eyes sunken, uniforms torn. One instructor spoke, voice flat. "Congratulations, you made it through, but don't mistake survival for success. This was just to strip you down. What happens next will decide who rises." The group barely reacted. No cheers, no smiles, just weary nods. Later, as Sarah limped back to the barracks, Harrison intercepted her. He walked beside her in silence for a few paces, then spoke. "You know why I didn't step in last night?" Sarah shook her head, too tired to answer. "Because no one can carry you through this. Not me, not anyone. You had to make the choice yourself. You did." She swallowed hard. "I almost didn't." His gaze sharpened. "Almost doesn't matter. What matters is what you did. You stood, remember that." He walked away, leaving her with words that sank deeper than the pain in her shoulder. She sat on her bunk, body broken, but heart steadier than ever. Hell Week hadn't just tested her body. It had shown her something she hadn't known before. That strength wasn't measured by the absence of weakness. It was measured by the decision to keep going despite it. And in that decision, Sarah Martinez discovered a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Why do some stories begin where others end? Why does the smallest act, done with quiet resolve, echo further than any shouted victory? The final evaluation wasn't announced. It simply arrived. A cold morning. The candidates assembled in the briefing room, eyes sunken, bodies scarred from weeks of relentless training. A map was spread across the table. An instructor pointed with a gloved finger. "This is your last exercise. You'll operate as if it were real. Intelligence suggests an armed cell is moving through this area. Your task: intercept, identify, neutralize the threat. No one will tell you if you're right or wrong until it's over." The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. Sarah's team was smaller now. Only 4 remained from the original group of 10. Their faces were hollow, eyes hardened by fatigue. Each of them had seen others break. None of them wanted to be the last to fail. The exercise began before dawn. They moved through dense woods, rain clinging to branches, mist curling low across the ground. Every step was a test of endurance. Every sound in the distance sent nerves sparking. Hours passed, then movement appeared ahead. Figures in mismatched uniforms, weapons slung. They walked in loose formation, careless. The enemy cell. Sarah's team fanned out. The leader whispered orders, "Flank left, set an ambush, quick." Sarah hesitated. Something felt wrong. She studied the figures. Their weapons were held poorly. Their formation was sloppy, almost deliberately so, too sloppy. A memory surfaced, the fake convoy at Gate 3, the staged courier with the civilians, patterns that didn't add up. Her gut twisted. This wasn't the real test, not yet. The team readied weapons, breath held, fingers on triggers. Then Sarah noticed something else. A second group, deeper in the trees, moving quieter, more disciplined. Her pulse quickened. That's the real threat. If her team opened fire on the sloppy group, they'd expose themselves. The disciplined group would flank and eliminate them easily. Her team leader whispered sharply, "On my mark, fire." Sarah's chest tightened. She could obey. Follow orders, fire at the wrong group and fail, or disobey, risk everything. The memory of Harrison's words cut through the storm in her head. Almost doesn't matter. What matters is what you did. Her voice cut sharp. "Wait." The leader whipped his head toward her, fury in his eyes. "What are you doing, Martinez?" "Look," she hissed, pointing. "That's the real cell back there. We fire now, we're dead." The team faltered, seconds stretched. Then one of them saw it too. The disciplined movement, the careful spacing, the glint of a real weapon. The leader cursed under his breath, adjusted his aim. The team shifted silently. When the ambush was sprung, the sloppy group scattered like actors in a play. The disciplined group engaged, but Sarah's team had the advantage now. They cut the enemy down with precision. A whistle blew, the firefight froze. Instructors emerged from the trees, Harrison among them. Exercise complete. Sarah's chest heaved, her weapon lowered slowly, relief mixed with exhaustion until she thought she might collapse. Back at the compound, the instructors lined them up. Harrison stepped forward. His gaze swept the battered candidates, but when it landed on Sarah, it lingered. "You've all been tested," he said, "not just in strength or endurance, but in judgment, in character, in the choices you made when there were no easy answers." His voice dropped lower, but carried to every ear. "One of you saw the trap today. One of you refused to accept the surface answer. One of you trusted instincts sharpened not by arrogance, but by discipline. That choice didn't just save your team in a simulation. It's the kind of choice that saves lives in the field." Sarah's throat tightened, she knew. "Sergeant Martinez," Harrison said, "step forward." Her legs trembled as she obeyed. She stood in front of him, drenched, bruised, uniform torn. Harrison looked at her, eyes steady. "6 months ago, you were given gate duty, a joke, an assignment meant to bury you, but you didn't let it. You treated it like it mattered. And because of that, it did. You saw what others ignored. You refused to quit when your body begged you to. You carried yourself with judgment when others chose speed. That's why you're here. That's why you'll go further." He paused, then spoke softer for her alone. "Excellence isn't about the assignment. It's about the standard you bring to it. Remember that." Sarah swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, then turned to the formation. "Sergeant Martinez has passed every test, and she will move forward into Joint Special Operations. She's earned it." Applause broke across the compound, faint at first, then stronger. Sarah stood tall, but inside emotion surged. Later, when the compound quieted and the candidates rested, Sarah walked alone to the edge of the training ground. The sky was fading to twilight. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. She thought about the girl who had once been mocked in a mess hall, the one who sat with humiliation burning in her chest, the one who carried shame heavier than any rucksack. That girl was gone. In her place stood a soldier who had proven something deeper than strength. She thought about every moment of doubt, every temptation to quit, every voice that said she didn't belong. And then she thought about the choices she had made anyway. Not loud choices, not glorious ones, just steady, quiet right. Her journey wasn't finished. The path ahead would be darker, more dangerous than anything she had faced yet. Missions in shadows, decisions without easy answers, sacrifices she could hardly imagine. But she was ready, because she finally understood. Dignity doesn't come from medals or promotions or applause. It comes from the way you carry yourself when no one believes in you, from the way you stand when no one thinks you can, from the way you act when silence is louder than praise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And that was enough.